Live everywhere.
Daily Co's Radio on netrootsradio.com presents
David Walton. Kagro in the Morning Show. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. It is Monday, May 6th, 2019, week 120, in case you were still counting, of the presidential apprentice, the impeachable apprentice, I guess at this point. Celebrity impeachment edition, maybe we talk about. Lots happening, of course, over the weekend, a particularly frothy Twitter weekend for the president. Oh, Greg Dworkin, my goodness. Decided he wasn't quite ready after all. That was the ring-in chimes. I guess he's just typing away and hitting buttons, and he's lining things up for our after calls. I guess you could call in, but we usually wait until at least the music stops. But I don't know, maybe too early? Okay, I think so too. We'll just wait it out. Plenty lining up, of course. The president spent the bulk of the weekend complaining about something or other. He got his golf in early on Saturday. All right, you ready to go? Okay, Greg, we'll go ahead and do it. You need something, get something done early today, Greg?
Well, you convinced me.
Okay. I mean, why not?
I was listening to the show. I hit the wrong button, but
yeah.
You convinced me maybe it was a good idea.
Sure, why not? We have not done it before, and trying something new.
Exactly.
Even if it's making a regularly scheduled telephone call a little earlier. It's all about minutia.
I won't do it every day. I'll let you actually finish. But,
I have nothing to tell anybody.
I'm rested. I think maybe I'll go interrupt David early.
Sure. I mean, why not? The president interrupted all of us out here in golf course territory early by golfing on Saturday because the weather was supposed to be bad on Sunday, and they can't keep him away from that. But the rest of the weekend he spent retweeting conspiracy theorists, etc. Something he began at the end of last week. And I think the new development over the weekend is that he's retweeting people who have come up with the idea that he ought to be credited additional time on his term in office because of the first 2 years being wasted with the witch hunt. Course,
well, he got it backwards, of course. That was, among other people, Franklin Graham, the Pharisee who likes to defend him. But actually, the analogy is the other way. It's time off for good behavior.
Yeah, maybe.
Right? If he behaves himself, we'll let him do 2 years less of his term than he otherwise normally would have.
I think he'd probably prefer that. If you could credit me with the full term, but just let me go home, I think I'd appreciate that. I think he'd rather take that.
Yeah, well, I think that would be a good deal. I think that's the deal America needs. Right? You go home.
Yeah.
We agree not to prosecute you and put you in jail until your term is over. Mm-hmm. And then when your term is over, we prosecute you and put you in jail.
Yes, and also I should point out, just for the record, I might be lying about waiting, but I might not be. So go ahead.
Yeah, so go ahead. There's a whole bunch of stuff we want to talk about today. There's a shocking new report that paints a terrifying picture for the future of the species. Up to 1 million species are at risk of extinction because of climate change. On the other hand, we have
okay.
So
other hand to that.
That's why I felt like I had to get on the show quick. Before we're all gone. Speaking of before we're all gone, John Bolton and Trump are saber-rattling about Iran. They're sending a carrier task force group there because of rumors that Iran was planning to attack the United States, which is transparently stupid. But then again, it's the Trump administration. This at a time that it's 9:05 now, so in about 25 minutes the market will crash because of Trump's expected 25% tariffs against China. And over the weekend, the People's Republic of North Korea shot off a whole bunch of missiles in Trump's face. And Trump was publicly reported to privately be stewing at Kim Jong-un, his best friend and, I'm with you kind of person, because Kim Jong-un is defying Trump and going back on the words that were never said. So, by the way, Kim Jong-un also reportedly had a bunch of people executed because the Hanoi summit didn't really come off very well. That's because it was poorly planned and poorly executed by the United States. So naturally what you do is you kill a bunch of North Koreans.
In North Korea, I guess that's the way it goes.
Yeah.
Huh.
So you have
Maybe
the incompetency of the Trump administration on foreign affairs in full display, while at the same time things are hurting for the world in regard to species and hurting for the economy in terms of market crashes. Not that the market represents the economy, it does not. But you have that. Then, of course, you have the presidential Democratic primaries with fascinating new policies, one by Cory Booker on gun safety. And Bernie came up with a really interesting, which I talked about a lot in the Pundit Roundup today, approach to rural and farm policy.
Oh, okay.
Which Elizabeth Warren has also done. And, part of their appeal is a populist one. And they're highlighting the fact that the meatpacking industry is essentially run by 4 large companies, and many of them are multinational or foreign national companies. One in particular caught my eye because it's 2 Brazilian guys who were convicted and sent to jail for trying to bribe the last couple of presidents in Brazil. And there's actually a class action suit by American farmers and ranchers trying to do something about the fact that they're running the meat industry. Interestingly, I learned from looking at Bernie's and Elizabeth Warren's coverage in the Des Moines Register that Iowa, where a lot of this discussion is taking place, actually has a law that foreign nationals are not allowed to own farmland.
Really?
But they are allowed to own the product. Right, so if you don't own the land, but you have, let's say, Argentinian beef, for the sake of argument, or your company
Brazilian
owns the
beef.
cattle that rents the land from the American farmer who owns it, that's perfectly legal.
Okay, so you can't own the land underneath, but what grows in it or wanders over it and eats the grass.
Right, and because of that, both Warren and Bernie are making very, very populist approaches to their foreign policy, which we don't cover a lot, but I thought was interesting.
No.
Bernie's also thrown in some, important observations, if not the solutions, to things about rural hospitals closing, which is true.
Yes, big for
the
him.
need for broadband in rural areas, which is true. By the way, one of the problems with the move to 5G is that the data transmission is faster, but each of the towers that sends out the signal has a much shorter range. So unless you have a lot of towers, rural areas might get left out of that. So there's just a whole lot to unpack there. But the fact that they're tackling rural policy is interesting, good, and fascinating.
Yeah, it's a big deal for Bernie as a Vermont senator, as he's always had a large portion of his agenda given over to rural issues like that. Rural Vermont is a little different from a lot of the rest of the country, and vice versa.
In some ways, not in others.
Yeah, but in addressing the fact that rural areas tend to get left out of big policy initiatives that aren't about farms is a big deal for him, and a big deal for, let's say, rural areas. They may also enjoy this.
So Elizabeth Warren had her policy out in March, and Bernie did his over the weekend. But very, very much.
It's early.
Of importance, and of course Cory Booker's policy about guns as well. And hopefully, what'll happen is whoever wins will wind up stealing the best of the policies. That's both traditional and good. In fact, if everybody, Beto has some interesting immigration policies, and so does Julian Castro. Of all people, Elizabeth Warren cited Castro as, immigration policies of quite interest. So hopefully everybody will come out with something good, and then,
very on brand.
We'll consolidate it and have a really good platform.
On brand for her. It's not just, I don't just put out policies of my own. I read the ones that other people put out.
Exactly.
That's
right.
a wonk.
Yeah.
Okay.
So how is that playing? Well, pretty good for Elizabeth Warren, not so good for Kamala Harris. Here is a Firehouse Strategies poll. Firehouse Strategies is Marco Rubio's pollster.
Oh, okay.
And they're looking at Iowa, New Hampshire, and South Carolina, and showing that Biden got this really big announcement bounce. In Iowa, for example, we were just talking about Iowa. Joe Biden's at 34.9%. That's up 10 from their last poll. Bernie's at 13.7, which is up 4. Pete Buttigieg is 11.4, unchanged. Elizabeth Warren is 10.4, unchanged. Kamala Harris is 4.9. She's down 12.
Huh.
And Beto's down 1. Amy Klobuchar is down 1 at 3.5. Cory Booker's down 2. And the unsure factor is at 16, down 9. That's in Iowa. So Biden got a 10-point bounce, in other words. And a lot of that seems to come from Kamala Harris's support, interestingly.
Yes. That's that. I would not have guessed that, but I don't know what I would have guessed. But
well,
I
again,
would have
keep
said,
in
I don't want to
mind,
guess
other
anything.
polls that people have argued about, but nonetheless the polls are there and they show this, is that, a strong part of Joe Biden's support is from female people of color.
Yeah.
They may have left Harris and gone to Biden.
Yeah, maybe for the time being, anyway.
For the time being, right? For the time being, this is not predictive
also,
in any way,
guess,
shape, or form.
Right.
Donald Trump was at 5% in the polls at this particular point in time, just as a reminder, back in 2015. So no, this doesn't mean that this is what's going to happen. But here's what's going on right now: in New Hampshire, next door to Vermont, next door to rural Vermont.
Yeah.
Joe Biden is at 34, up 12. Bernie's at 15, up 3. Buttigieg is at 9.7, unchanged. Warren, 9.1, unchanged. It's also close to Massachusetts. Kamala Harris is 7, down 6. So there's another place where support goes from her. And in South Carolina, Biden's at 48.3. He's up 12 points in South Carolina from this last poll. Bernie at 11.9, up 4. Buttigieg is unchanged at 5. Warren, 4.5, unchanged. Sound familiar?
Yeah.
Kamala Harris is 4.3, down 8. And in New Hampshire, the unsure is down 16 points. In South Carolina, the unsure is down 11 points. So we're moving along. People are consolidating, trying to really figure out what's going on. The unsure is now not 50% anymore.
Yeah. All right. Well, first I was going to say, I guess the migration, if that's what it is, from Harris to
and we don't know that. I'm just saying it's notable.
No, I guess I get what you're saying, because that did come up at the end of last week. South Carolina, really the only one of those 3 states where I would say there's a significant population to wonder about. But okay, I mean, if the wondering is, I think women of color migrating from Harris support to Biden support. I don't know that you would. I wouldn't pick Iowa or New Hampshire as the place to measure that. South Carolina, you have a better shot at it, I would think.
Well, all 3 are consistent. But then again, it's the same pollster who may be using the same flawed methodology. I don't know.
I mean, so you said it was Rubio's pollster?
It's Marco Rubio. It's a Republican pollster.
Yeah, I mean,
but it was flashed to me over Twitter by John Anzalone, who's a Democratic pollster.
All right, well.
So he's got the Democratic pollster endorsement of that Republican poll.
And it happened.
Yeah, it's a thing and it happened, and that's what we talk about on the show sometimes.
Yeah. Okay.
So, again, that's background. So as long as we're talking about, by the way, international stuff, which we have, let me also mention that Alex Cora, the manager of the Red Sox, is not going to the White House. He won't be making the trip because he's not happy with Donald Trump's Puerto Rican policies or non-policies.
That's national news.
Right. The quote from Cora is, "I've used my voice on many occasions so the Puerto Ricans are not forgotten, and my absence in the White House is no different."
Okay.
So let it not be mistaken for something else. Other international stuff. Here's a nice little piece from The Guardian. If Labor really wants, that's Labor spelled wrong, L-A-B-O-U-R. If Labor really wants to, they do that in England. If Labor really wants to move on, it has to back a second referendum.
Oh, okay. Yes.
The party has to make the case that Brexit isn't worth it and focus on issues such as wages and the National Health Service. Now, here's the analogy, again, that we've seen with U.S. politics. All right? Jeremy Corbyn wants to talk about wages and health care and to even argue, this particular article says, to even discuss which of the many different ways Brexit should go. Just to have that discussion is to play into the conservatives' hands because it's a conservative issue.
All right.
Labour would like to not talk about Brexit at all because it's not their issue. It's like talking about the southern border and immigration for Democrats.
Okay.
Any discussion, no matter what position you take, is going to highlight Donald Trump and where he stands. Now, even if you put baby jails at the top of the list, well, why did this happen and what's going on? And, it's a divisive issue that at least potentially could play for the Republicans regardless. And that's been true in past elections, not this one, but past elections for national security being a so-called Republican issue. The Republicans have completely chopped that to pieces because they have people like John Bolton and warmongers in Iraq and the war and W and all that. So and that doesn't exist the way it used to, but it kind of used to. That Democrats didn't really want to talk about national security because it just didn't play well for them. So Corbyn's the same way with Brexit. But this article makes the point that, hey, if you really want to get past Brexit, then what you really have to do is be for a people's vote.
Okay.
Right? Because that's the only way you get past it. You can't take the argument that this is the wrong issue for you, therefore don't talk about it. You have to say this is the wrong issue for you, therefore you have to deal with it. That's the better way to approach it.
All right.
And that argument logically concludes, therefore, you have to be for a second people's referendum because then at least you know what you're doing. Until then, all you're going to wind up looking like is you're trying to make a soft Brexit deal with the Conservatives, which is going to look terrible for you. And there were just local elections where Labour just got clobbered. Conservatives lost a tremendous number of seats, but so did Labour. And part of the reason for that is people don't know what the hell they really stand for.
Yeah, well, it's probably the worst time to try to figure it out, too.
Right. The Liberal Democrats, who were an alternative to Labour, did really strongly. So did the Greens.
All right.
Labour did terrible, and the Conservatives did even worse. Now, the Conservatives did worse because their House Freedom Caucus, 30% of the country, is really mad at Theresa May for not actually delivering on Brexit. And Labour is doing badly because nobody knows what the heck they want.
Well,
right. A lesson for Democrats is you really have to stand for something. You can't just stand against something.
Probably true. Yeah. It's funny. I was thinking the whole time about is impeachment or something like it. The
well, you can't just be against
crisis.
Trump. You have to have a plan.
Right.
Impeachment happens to be a plan.
Well, yeah.
And, of course, all the many different policies that we've talked about just now, from rural area, broadband, hospitals, healthcare. I mean, Democrats have policies. They're for stuff. They're not in the situation that Labor is because it's really hard to figure out anything that Labor's for. So the Democrats are ahead in that game. But, again, it has to be more than just being against Trump. Trump will be the referendum centerpiece of the election, regardless of what you do. You don't need to push that. He's there. He'll make himself the center. Fine. A lot of people will vote against him. But if you want to win what's likely to be a very winnable but close election, then you got to be for something. And so, that you got to put your markers down on that.
Maybe. You can't just be against climate change, You got to be for something.
Yeah, well, you got to be for doing something about it.
Yeah, right. So I'm against having this guy in office.
Yeah, I am always for more services and less taxes.
Yeah,
always
get it.
Right. So anyway, really interesting in terms of how things are shaken out in the UK there, at least the UK for now. This is only fueling Scottish independence desires. The Scots are looking at the Brits and saying, you guys are crazy. You guys in England, south of the border, you're nuts. You don't know what you're doing. Why do we want to be associated with you?
I do not know. You got to redo the flags, and that's very expensive.
Yeah, well,
but okay.
Yeah, it's been done.
Yes, that's true.
They have a lot of
models in the archives somewhere.
Right, exactly. So all of this interesting stuff going on at the same time. By the way, did you know today is the day for Secretary Mnuchin to hand over the Trump tax returns to Representative Richard Neal and the Ways and Means Committee?
Yes, today is the day that he's supposed to do that.
That's he may or he may not do that. So that leads to the next segment here, which will probably carry over to after the break. But here is a behind the paywall but short, interesting piece from Tierney Sneed from Talking Points memo. Sorry, House Democrats, there's no capital jail for you to detain defiant witnesses. And it's a bit of a history lesson, but it's got some great Congressional Research Service documents as backup here.
Okay. And
they talk about the fact that there is actually no jail cell in the House of Representatives, despite rumors.
That is the jail calling to say you're right. Yeah, it's not there. It may never have been there, but I don't know why. I don't know why people thought that. There's a room that has some bars on it, I think, and they thought. But there's a lot of cages in Congress. Honestly, that's not a joke. There's a lot of. They just are.
They just are. Okay. Well, we could always use one. So Representative Jamie Raskin, Democrat from Maryland, is a constitutional law professor who sits on both judiciary and oversight. And she told reporters Thursday night, we're all talking about it. And he pointed to a court case that established the authority Congress has to hold in contempt those defying its orders. And we'll talk about that in a bit.
Okay.
But he says, this includes being held in our jail down in the basement. I haven't gone to see it, but I understand it's still down there.
Yeah.
And the image of a sergeant of arms taking a contemptuous witness and throwing him or her in some dingy jail underneath the Capitol is helping the inherent contempt proposal catch fire on the Hill, at least among reporters asking lawmakers about the idea. But one problem with the rumor is actually, according to the Office of the House Historian, and there is such a person, there is not, in fact, a Capitol jail for House Democrats to throw defiant witnesses in.
Not in the building, no.
Right. In the 19th century, it was referred to Capitol Prison or Old Capitol Jail. But actually, that's where the Supreme Court sits now, and it was just a building where Congress met for a few years in the 1800s when the Capitol building was used. It was undergoing repairs. Okay, and that structure, now replaced by the Supreme Court, was used during the Civil War as a jail by the Union Army to detain various prisoners. So no evidence suggests that any room in the Capitol was ever designated for use as a jail, the actual Capitol we have now.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
But this whole thing about contempt is, and I think we talked about this a little bit last week, it's just fascinating to me, being a non-lawyer, non-expert who simply read a couple of articles, and therefore I'm going to talk about it on the show.
No, sure. Why not?
Right? Why not? Congressional Research Service is good articles if you want to read that. So as I understand it, there's basically three branches of government, right? There's the executive, the judicial, and the legislative. And each of them has a role to play when Congress wants to declare contempt and defiance pushback, right? Because you can go through the executive, which is Department of Justice. You can refer somebody who's in contempt to them and hope they get prosecuted. That never happens. We saw that with Lois Lerner from the IRS. We saw that with Eric Holder. I mean, there's lots of situations where Congress decides that maybe we should hold somebody on a contempt and sends it to the DOJ, and DOJ says, we're not going to do anything about this.
Yes.
In fact, there's a whole long list. One of the two CRS documents I sent, the longer one, Contempt Power and the Enforcement of Congressional Subpoenas, Law History, Practice, and Procedure, has a whole list of the times that Congress suggested that they do this and really nothing happened. But maybe more interesting.
That's a good list.
It is the second way that this could happen is you could send a subpoena, and if it doesn't get listened to, then you give it to the courts to try to enforce it. So that would be a judicial way of trying to enforce a contempt move. Okay. But the third way is the one that people are talking about, this inherent contempt, because that's one that the legislature does in and of itself, all by itself, without having to worry about the executive or the judicial not cooperating with you.
It's so fun.
And that's the one that apparently used to be used 100 years ago. And then in the intervening years, laws about how the executive would do it got passed. And so it's generally done through the Department of Justice or through the courts. But this inherent contempt refers to the fact that Congress used to do it itself. Yeah. And the second Congressional Research Service piece I have here is called Congressional Subpoenas Enforcing Executive Branch Compliance. And on page 12 of that one and 13, there's an interesting piece and an interesting story.
Okay.
And it says here, the historical process, inherent contempt. Historically, the House and Senate relied on their own institutional power to not only enforce congressional subpoenas, but also to respond to other actions that the House viewed as obstructing their legislative processes or prerogatives. And the criminal contempt statute, which would go through DOJ, wasn't enacted until 1857.
Yeah.
So the criminal side of it is late, relatively speaking. Mm-hmm. And then this fascinating footnote, and I learned a new word today.
Okay.
The inherent contempt has been used to, quote, deal with either physical obstruction of the legislative body in the discharge of its duties, or physical assault upon its members for action taken or words spoken in the body. I guess that's when you cane people.
Yes.
Or obstruction of its officers in the performance of their official duties, or the prevention of members from attending so that their duties might be performed, or finally, with contumacy, my word of the day, in refusing to obey orders to produce documents or give testimony where there is a right to compel. Now, contumacy is a old legal word, no longer used.
Huh. Okay.
Which basically means defiant stubbornness.
Huh. I haven't heard that one used in relation to contempt. I mean, there's all sorts of weird and archaic words swirling around contempt, but
yeah. So that's a new one.
All right, contumacy. So 1857, you said, right? Was the the criminal statute.
And prior to that, it was inherent contempt that was implied but not exactly spelled out by the Constitution that allowed Congress to do these things.
Yeah.
So if you're going to go the judicial route, which is what looks like Judiciary Committee is doing, then you have to establish you've bent over backwards trying to resolve this before you sent it to the courts. Mm-hmm. And that's why it appears that the Democrats are so loath to just go ahead and declare stuff and throw down the hammer.
I see.
They're trying to establish that they really, really tried.
All right. They want to take the longer and more difficult route that doesn't work, but that requires you show that you tried hard. Okay.
Yeah.
That's a thought. We'll be right back. Hi, everybody. It's me, David. Let's change things up from the old fundraising pitch for just a minute and talk instead about how you can be a part of our show. If you've got a smartphone or any other electronic recording device, why not sit down and record a segment for us? Read us an important article and give us your take. Read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Then send the file to me at kagrox@gmail.com, and I'll try and work it into the show. Short segments, a few minutes in length, are easiest to fit in. And of course, I can't always guarantee that I'll be able to play everything, but if you've ever shouted at your radio or TV about something you wish was being covered, here's your chance to change that. Make the show your own. Send your submissions to me at kagrox@gmail.com. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Still here and with Greg Dworkin. I'm conducting research quickly as we scroll. I'm catching up on all of these great things that you've found for us in these, at least I know about the first one, the first of the CRS documents, and I think it's been updated since I've seen it last, but this was something that we used to circulate back in the George W. Bush days when they were having difficulty getting executive branch officials to testify even then. So,
right.
Yeah.
Well, speaking of which, one of the things I highlighted in the Pundit Roundup today, Michael Beschloss subtweeting us all, and he tweeted, New York Times 45 years ago this month, the headline reads, Nixon rejects subpoenas, tells Rodina he'll get no more Watergate data.
Okay. Did they?
They did not succeed with that. So there are precedents for getting subpoenas filled even when the president doesn't want to. So again, from these CRS documents are great reads. They're really well written. They're clear even for us non-lawyers. They give us an idea what's going on. They're often a history lesson. And in this particular one that I was reading from with that footnote and the 1857 reference, says, in practice, the inherent contempt power has been exercised using a multi-step process.
Okay.
Well, process is like the subtext of our show, right?
Yeah.
Upon adopting a House or Senate resolution authorizing the execution of an arrest warrant by that chamber's sergeant at arms, the individual alleged to have engaged in contemptuous conduct is taken into custody and brought before the House or Senate. A hearing or trial follows in which allegations are heard, defenses raised, and although generally occurring before the full body, it would appear likely that the contempt hearing could also permissibly take place before a congressional committee. So judiciary could act as the jury there.
Okay.
Who reports its findings to the whole House or Senate. If judged guilty, the House or Senate may then direct that the witness be detained or imprisoned until the obstruction to the exercise is removed. It's not punitive. In other words, you don't get to sentence William Barr to 50 years of hard labor. It's basically you have to be confined until you give us the Muller report.
Yeah, you have to correct the contempt.
And then you're done.
Yeah, you're still
but
in it.
But not beyond the end of the Congress. So if you want to run out the clock, Barr could say, okay, I'm not doing anything until you guys dissolve. That would be 2020.
Yes, that's why well, it's too bad we don't control the Senate. I wonder if that would work the same for contempt of the Senate. And so we didn't dissolve.
Because they don't dissolve.
We're a
exactly.
continuing body.
It just says not beyond the end of the Congress. I don't know quite what that means.
Yes.
If you have a continuous body, I don't know what that means.
Right. I guess no one does. I don't know whether we'll see whether the Senate has any cases.
The point is, again, I learned this from David. The House reinstitutes itself every 2 years, but the Senate continues.
That's what they like to say about themselves anyway.
Yeah. So is it true? Well, that's where you have to go to court to find out.
Yeah, right. Exactly. So very interesting. As I mentioned, it's been updated since we last saw it. This was Brad Miller's favorite guiding document when he was chair of the Science Committee's subcommittee on oversight. And he was having great difficulty getting people to comply, and he began to look into inherent contempt. And he was the leading advocate for it among Democrats back in the day. And, of course, leadership Democrats thought, if we're going to do this thing, it's not going to be from the Science Oversight Subcommittee. Right. But I think it would have been a fantastic place to do it from. I mean, where else could you isolate the pure issues of law so easily, But, okay.
So here's the official Twitter internet definition of contumacy.
Oh.
It's stubborn refusal to obey or comply with authority, especially a court order or summons. So I'm just going on record now. We have a lot of interesting and very good Democratic candidates, and they'll be debating.
Contumacy. Yes.
Whoever uses contumacy first in the debates gets my vote. I'm just saying, I'm laying that out right now.
Yeah, you could say people have contumacy issues, things like that.
We'll
sovereign citizens do, for instance.
Right? Depends will fix that if that's your problem.
I can help you with that. That's how Trump would probably interpret that. I'm looking now at all the footnotes that you're pointing to on that page, and half of them are from Committee on the Judiciary versus Myers, Harriet Myers.
Yes.
I told you
this stuff has come up before, and in our lifetime, and recent enough so that one could actually remember this. And again, those CRS documents are just wonderful history lessons.
And if you are a Republican, well, get out of here. But if you are, or someone has handed you this, you can read about the Committee on Oversight and Government Reform v. Holder, which is also a footnote in here. So this happens fairly frequently. It usually gets settled in other ways, but yeah, this is pretty interesting. And as I had pointed out to you also just during that break, there may be a relationship here between the 1857 enactment of the criminal contempt statute and the 1856 caning of Sumner. I don't know how they dealt with that actually, but I wouldn't be surprised if they at that point said, you know what, it'd be nice if we had just a straight up, you're actually a criminal, get out of here, report, to go to jail, go directly to jail, rather than us having to waste time with this. If you cane somebody in the Senate, you should be hauled out of here on your ass.
Right. So again, one last piece here in terms of a history lesson, again from Attorney Snead, who wrote this up for TPM. There was, however, at least one instance the historian could find in which a witness, a real estate speculator named Hallett Kilbourne, was held in an actual jail. In that case, it was the District of Columbia's common jail. Kilbourne ultimately filed a lawsuit challenging his detention that went to the Supreme Court, which ultimately imposed some limits on Congress's contempt powers. But there was also separate litigation over his habit, while in detention, of ordering lavish meals from the house restaurant and the refusal by the sergeant of arms to pick up the tab. So maybe Trump is a student of history anyway. This kind of thing he would do. Yes.
You hold on a second. Did you say pick up the tab? Now you got my attention.
Yeah, exactly.
All right.
Oh, yeah. Well, you're going to arrest me? Fine. I'll just order the fanciest restaurant food here, and I'll just, charge it to the government who's holding me.
He may
and I'll get Franklin Graham to defend the whole idea that, this is wrong, and maybe you should give me an extra 2 years for this.
Yeah.
Mr. Trump, you want 2 more years in jail? Mm-hmm. Wait. That's not what I said. Wait.
I know, but I do want 2 years of free food.
Yeah, exactly. Free food. Maybe it's not such a bad deal.
Yeah, he'd order from the
and while I'm
steakhouse
in jail, you guys can't
Hotel.
throw me in jail. So, hey, it's got some pluses to it.
Right. He would double dip on that. He'd get the steaks from the hotel, and then not only does he bill it to the government.
Joke's on you, Mr. Trump. Yeah. They're Trump steaks.
They're originals.
Originals, right. They're about 75 years old and tough as nails.
Unlike
so,
okay.
Interesting history, and I just thought it'd be a good way to start the week off. This all while Democrats are debating the whole idea of impeachment. More and more people are saying, it may be a trap. It may backfire.
Yes.
It may redound to Trump's benefit because he could stir up his base. But you know what? You got to do it anyway.
Yes. Well, they say that about a lot of things.
What do you mean it's the right thing to do? This is Washington. We don't look at things in terms of the right thing to do. We look at it in terms of horse race. Well,
yeah,
okay,
right.
But it's the right thing to do.
Well, it does happen occasionally, or people are occasionally reminded, oh, yeah, right thing. Should be doing that.
There's a great Leonard Pitts column. Many of Leonard Pitts' columns are great, but this one was basically going on his back and forth about what to do. By January of this year, my ardor for that remedy, which is impeachment, had cooled somewhat. I wrote that while Trump surely deserves impeachment, this is all, by the way, in the printed roundup, but I give it to you directly.
Okay, thank you.
And make it easier for you. Yeah. There it is.
Let's see.
I wrote that while Trump surely deserves impeachment, the politics of the moment would make that futile, as Senate Republicans are unlikely to vote for his removal. Besides, I noted the process would fracture an already fractured union while failing to address the core sickness that made Trump's presidency possible. Now, I still believe all that, but I'm here to change my mind again.
Okay.
The Muller Report. It's given me clarity, helped me appreciate something I didn't appreciate fully enough before, namely that in allowing all of this to be framed solely around questions of what's politic and what's pragmatic, we miss something. There's a moral imperative here, a stark question of right and wrong. These people keep doing things government officials are simply not supposed to do.
Yes, that's bad.
The point.
Okay. I'm glad he changed his mind, I guess. Okay. It takes a while. And so the Mueller report gave him clarity. That's also good. And more people should be reading it or paying attention to it in some way. And I'm interested in anybody who wants to serialize it or animate it or turn it into an audiobook or whatever. And I think Audible actually did turn it into an audiobook. I don't know if it's any good. I might be interested in listening to it. But there's got to be if there's a Schoolhouse Rock way of reading it to people, I would like to see somebody do that. I did ask originally for the Taiwanese animation guys to help out with this, but I don't know. That may take them too long. They seem to have disappeared from the field.
And I'll just leave you with this. This is David Frum highlighting something from the Mueller Report, Volume 2, page 76. And he says, I feel like these 2 sentences from Volume 2 of the Mueller Report have not gotten anything like the attention they deserve.
Oh.
It says, as described in Volume 1, the evidence uncovered in the investigation did not establish that the president or those close to him were involved in the charged Russia computer hacking or active measure conspiracies, or that the president otherwise had any unlawful relationship with any Russian official. But the evidence does indicate that a thorough FBI investigation would uncover facts about the campaign and the president personally that the president could have understood to be crimes or that would give rise to personal or political concerns. That is the sentence. And I read that and I said, this reminds me of the Kavanaugh investigation. Remember when the FBI did a extremely limited by the Republican investigation of Kavanaugh and said, see, he's clean because we re-interviewed the one person that we had already interviewed once and didn't find anything new.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's true. That comes to mind. Of course, another thing.
A thorough investigation, on the other hand, is a different kettle of fish.
Yes. And one of the things that I guess if you were on your way, let's say, to conduct a thorough investigation of something, and then something or someone came along into the picture, and then a thorough investigation was not conducted, you might say that the person that injected themselves into the situation did something to justice at that point.
You mean obstruct?
Yes, that's the word. And I knew there was another one of those weird arcane terms that I couldn't remember or bring to mind. But, I mean, I guess that footnote says, but for obstruction of justice, which I'm not allowed to charge the president with, a thorough investigation would have shown something really serious. Yeah. But we didn't do that because of that thing that happened to justice along the way. And not, I forgot about justice, or I decided to dispense with justice, or we don't believe in justice, but rather that someone obstructed justice. And and it is it's also actually very like the Kavanaugh thing. We had an investigation. It happened. I flipped a coin, and we decided it was over.
So, in my roundabout way, that's kind of the summary of everything that's going on. A little bit of this, a little bit of that. It's a lot going on. Sort of tough to, give an abbreviated roundup of everything, but there's my best shot at it.
Well, okay. Thank you.
And I got more to read if you want to read more. Lots on impeachment. But we're now, meaning me, I know a little bit more about contempt and inherent contempt and what's been done by Congress before. I knew a little bit more now than I did before, thanks to those CRS articles.
Yeah, they're always helpful, and great collection and a great service of the I forget who's actually behind the cataloging and making available of all of these CRS reports because they don't publish them. CRS, they're prohibited from doing so actually by the people who pay their salaries. But the CRS reports, as people order them, they're not classified, and so if you happen to get a handle on one, there are a couple of organizations out there. The Federation of American Scientists, actually.
That's generally where I get my CRS reports from. That's what
generally
these,
where you'll
URLs
find almost all of them. Yeah, whatever you look for. They just, very presciently at some point decided what we ought to do. Something we need to set aside money and resources for is anytime anybody gets a Congressional Research Service report of any kind, that's produced with public money. We have a right to see them. If you happen to get one, let's scan it and put it in our database. And they've been invaluable for decades not so many decades for the internet necessarily, but a decade anyway, and a little bit more into their second decade of providing that invaluable service for everyone on just about every topic. So kudos to the Federation of American Scientists. Go science. You're pretty smart.
Yep. So anyway, that's me for today. That's it. The rest is you. Bye.
Okay. Thanks very much. That's science.
I'll be back on Wednesday. We'll do it again. This is Greg Dworkin speaking with my good friend David Waldman Kagro in the morning. My job to do that little identification blurb every once in a while, just in case you join us mid-show. And we'll do it again on Wednesday.
Okay. Thanks very much, Greg. I appreciate it. I wonder if I can find something about like a policy statement as to why they decided to do that originally. I mean, besides the fact that it was a really good idea, whether there was a policy statement at some point, because I'm sure there was some kind of debate too. I'm sure some portion of the Federation of American Scientists said, I mean, that's a good idea, but why does it have to be us? And I don't know how they resolved that, but it was just plain good idea. There's an about FAS I can read, but I don't know. I'll have to look around. I'd love to know what was the origin of it and what was the first thing that they tried to get a hold of from CRS that caused difficulty and why I don't know. Not certain why they did it. There's also out there, by the way, everycrsreport.com, which I am not certain isn't the same collection or even motivated by the same idea. But let's see. I'm just sort of, do they identify who they are? Everycrsreport.com. We're publishing reports by Congress's think tank, the Congressional Research Service, which provides valuable insight on and nonpartisan analysis of issues of public debate. These reports are already available to the well-connected. We're making them available to everyone for free. And, why is it... we have talked, I think, in the past about, let me see, I can read about the About page. We have talked in the past about why they don't generally publish every report, even though they're prepared with public dollars. And the reason is that the reason there's no blanket order to publish everything is that very often CRS reports are prepared to order, custom built reports, essentially, when a member of Congress has questions, and sometimes those questions can be confidential or strategically confidential anyway, if not actually classified. But when they are, for instance, considering legislation or considering something else, like, I don't know, if they were considering holding someone in inherent contempt, and they want a backgrounder, but they don't want it published right away because there's too much intelligence that you might be able to gather from that. I don't want people to know that I'm considering this legislation or that legislation until it's introduced. For instance, it either could be held against me, the idea could be sabotaged in some way, or I'm considering holding someone in inherent contempt, whatever it is. And so, occasionally there are good excuses for keeping things confidential. So CRS considers members of Congress and staff its clients and doesn't publish things as a matter of course. However, the bulk of what they publish doesn't have any such restriction. They just simply said, well, to keep our job simple, we simply won't bother with a publication, declassification strategy. And if others get a hold of these reports, we're not going to spend any of our budget chasing people down or trying to sue them or prevent them from publishing it. That's not our job. If there's a member of Congress that wants to try it, he can waste resources in his own office and try and prevent that. But other than that, we're just going to ignore the publication aspect of what we do entirely. It's just not part of our model. So other people had to build the models instead. Let's see. I have the every CRS report About page open, but I see Greg is sending a couple of other things, so I wonder if this is closer to the root of the question here. Let's see. Congressional CRS reports. CRS, a component of the Library of Congress, he's sent me this material, conducts research and analysis for Congress on a broad range of national policy issues. That's what we've described. The official CRS public portal, which includes many but not all CRS reports, is here. Where? I guess the portal, they provide it to us through FAS.org, the Federation of American Scientists website. So I guess, is that their, I guess that's their own collection of publicly available ones. Yeah, because there's always been a little pressure on them. Once people realized, one, that they were valuable information, two, that they were published with public dollars, and three, that they couldn't necessarily get them all, they got angry and started to push for publication of things. And so CRS was defeated and had to use some of its budget to feed the public after all. Even though, by the way, like if you wanted this CRS report and on inherent contempt, say, and didn't want to download it or couldn't download it, you can call your congressional representatives and ask for a copy to be mailed to you, and they will get it and mail it to you. The only things that they wouldn't be able to get would be, I guess, things that are specifically prepared for other members and that remain confidential. But then if the member who ordered it decides to publish it, I don't think CRS ever objects to that either. But anyway, let's see. We'll continue with their section here. We have obtained the Library of Congress's implementation plan to make CRS reports available to the public as required by the 2018 Omnibus Appropriations Law. How about that? Pretty recently. Unfortunately, it does not comport with the law or best practices for creating websites and is unusually expensive. Today, we released the library's May 22, 2018 CRS website implementation plan and Civil Society's June 6, 2018 memo that responds to that plan. We hope that in doing so, we will bring to the surface some of the problems with the CRS Reports website's proposed implementation so they can be fixed in time for the statutory deadline. Note, the memos we are releasing are not to be confused with the CRS memo to congressional staff about the library's plans, which was released to the Federation of American Scientists. Very interesting. So, some technicalities about technicalities there. What is this here? The CRS library plan to publish CRS reports falls short on the law and, what article is this? This is interesting. And is unduly expensive. This from the ledgebranch.org, Ledge Branch team. Daniel Schumann, who many of you actually probably know from Twitter. And also, oh, look at this. What a lineup. Hang on a second. Let me make sure I know exactly who we're talking about here. I think I'm thinking of somebody else in the middle slot here, but yeah, I am thinking of someone else here. But two of the names I definitely recognize. Maybe a third if I searched around a little bit more. But dang, where'd that Skype thing go? Oh, and I opened up the page. So this is Daniel Schumann with a C, S-C-H-U-M-A, and Kevin Kosar is the name I don't recognize for sure. And Josh Tauberer, also active on Twitter. He's like a government data transparency guy. And so, yeah, interesting. So I guess they all are working together on this ledgebranch.org project, which I guess you could read their about page. I won't read it to you. But this is their July 12, 2018 critique of the Library of Congress's response to consistent pressure to get CRS to publish all of their reports. Interesting. See what we go through just to get you the information you need to find out what is inherent contempt and how does it work. It shouldn't be this difficult to find out what the hell our government is doing, can do, could be doing if it really wanted to. But of course, the fewer of us that know that, the less trouble we can make for our legislators, and that's how they like it, and guess who pays CRS? So there you have it. That's the basic breakdown of the problem. Let's see, is there anything else that we should refer to? This one is, this is, I guess, the ledgebranch.org people noting that our website costs under $20,000 to build and maintain with full functionality and fewer than 100 hours of programming time. The library's CRS website will cost $1.5 million, have limited functionality. Sounds better so far, don't you think? Suffer from significant design limitations and not be completed for more than a year after the law was enacted and 6 months after the statutory deadline for completion. This falls significantly short of what Congress directed the library to accomplish and fails to meet basic public expectations for public access to CRS reports on a modern website. Yeah, that would kind of suck. All right, breaking news. Greg sends me, although I did just see somebody send me something with a breaking. So yeah, it's the same thing. So Greg has broken the breaking news, as has Rebecca Romans. Let's stop and take a look. Jim Sciuto on Twitter reports that breaking, see, I told you, House Judiciary Chairman schedules Wednesday vote to hold Attorney General William Barr in contempt of Congress. So that begins. And as you heard earlier, that probably means they'll go the statutory contempt route in order to cross all the I's and dot the T's, and then go back and do the reverse, and that way no one can accuse them of having missed anything. Manu Raju likewise reports that the House Judiciary will vote on Wednesday to hold Barr in contempt after Dem subpoena demands for full Muller report and underlying evidence are not met. And I guess they are they meeting now, or are they having a press conference to announce that that's what they're going to do on Wednesday? Whichever it is, it's live on CNN now. So just ignore that for the time being and stay here. There's not likely to be a whole lot of super exciting developments actually happening, although it might be interesting to watch them answering questions about how this whole thing works. Anyway, so that's out there. It was deadline day, I guess, for Barr to turn over the report, and also deadline day for Treasury to turn over the Trump tax returns. And we'll see. I am betting neither one actually happens today. But both cases will leave us in the same place shortly once it's learned, if this is the case, that Treasury and the IRS are simply not going to comply with what looks like black letter law that says they shall turn over those returns. The Congress will decide. I guess the Ways and Means Committee will take over again and decide what route to go. I don't know whether they're going to press it as contempt of Congress or sue based on the statute. I think it would be more solid probably for them to go the contempt of Congress route than to test the validity of the statute under which authority they claim the right to those returns. That will be tested anyway, as the Republicans will contest that statute as part of any defense to contempt of Congress. So they'll be commingled in any case, and pretty soon at that. I mean, but it won't solve a great deal, as it will be dragged out. And President Trump, for what it's worth, insists that he'll appeal everything all the way up to the Supreme Court, which is worrying on a number of fronts. One, of course, wow, big sound there. We might have to turn down the noise on that one. How did that get up so high? Anyway, it's disturbing in that he obviously intends to drag everything out as long as possible. It's also disturbing that I think the president just thinks that you can appeal as of right all the way up to the Supreme Court, and it's just the fact that people run out of money, and he's a billionaire, so he's not going to, even though he's not paying the tab on this thing, that it can get him to the Supreme Court. That's not the way it works either. No surprise. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio, and we'll jump back to the Trump tax returns issue. Just a side note on that. From Citizens for Crew, Citizens for what's the R in Crew? I don't even remember anymore. But I remember ethics. Citizens for what? Responsibility and Ethics in Washington. Is that what the R is for? I guess yeah. Citizens for Responsibility and Ethics in Washington. Just to make sure we got it right there. Tweeting this morning that Trump's IRS commissioner will decide, I guess today, it's up to him to decide whether or not to comply with the law. He's not supposed to have to decide. It's just supposed to be a shall comply thing. And but he's going to decide whether or not he wants to, say, risk criminal penalty by saying no. You always have that option, you know. Trump's IRS commissioner will decide whether or not to release Trump's tax returns. The IRS commissioner makes as much as $1 million, by the way, in rental income from Trump-branded property he owns, they say. So that's special. That sounds somewhat interesting. Their full write-up on it, just for a little additional context. Dated April 25th, Caroline Zhang writes for Crew. IRS commissioner charged with releasing Trump tax returns profits from Trump-branded property. I'm not so certain. I'd love to read this one just to see how direct is the connection here. But President Trump's hand-picked IRS commissioner, that's something, Charles Rettig, remember the name, earns as much as $1 million in rental income from the Trump-branded properties he co-owns while facing demands from Congress to release Trump's tax returns. What I mean is, Trump can't confiscate the property from, although who knows what Trump feels like he can do, either as the namesake of the property, he might think that actually confers some power on him, or as the president. And, as with everything these days, you have to take everything with the warning that some crazy judges might be willing to say, yeah, sure, you have this unprecedented power that no one's even hinted at belonging to the president at any point in history. Go for it. So who knows? Anyway, so he earns as much as $1 million in rental income from a Trump-branded property that he co-owns while facing demands from Congress to release Trump's tax returns. So again, some question about, like, is there any way that he would lose out on income if he were to comply with the law and furnish the Ways and Means Committee with the tax returns? I don't know if there's any legal mechanism to punish him financially, but Trump loves that the most among his methods of punishment, so who knows? But now, of course, I should say he used to love punishing people financially the most, but that was what he had in his power as a private citizen. Now that he's president, he probably thinks he can electrocute people, but I don't know. He hasn't tried it yet. The IRS has already missed more than one deadline set by the House Ways and Means Committee to turn over Trump's tax returns, so I guess the House Ways and Means Committee gave him another one. Rettig has stated that he will decide whether or not to release the tax returns under the supervision of Treasury Secretary Steve Mnuchin. When Trump nominated Rettig to lead the IRS in February of 2018, Rettig initially failed to disclose that the Hawaii real estate he owned was at a Trump-branded property. Okay. I don't know if that's necessary, but it's interesting. You would have to reveal that you own real estate and how much it's worth, and I guess at some level you would reveal the address, and then somebody could then look at that and say, oh, that's in a Trump building. It's interesting that you didn't say that, but we didn't ask you what was the name of the property. We just asked you what's the address. He bought a 50% interest in 2 units at Trump International Waikiki in 2006, ahead of the building's completion in 2009. It is likely that Trump profited off of his future IRS commissioner's purchase. Although the Trump organization does not own the Waikiki property, it's a branding deal that gave it 10% share of total pre-sales. So some money went to Trump, although, again, even so, I'm not certain what okay, so Charles Rettig is in charge of releasing the tax returns, but the charge is that he has paid Trump money. No, if Trump paid him money and he didn't do it, that would be something we would understand as bribery. You paid Trump money in order to buy it. Yeah. All right. Records indicate Rettig is definitely making money from this purchase. On his financial disclosure, he reported an income between $100,000 and $1 million in rent and or royalties from the units. That is a broad range, and I really wish they would narrow that, but that's the way they do things on financial disclosure forms. The 2 one-bedroom condos are valued at around $1.2 million each, according to Hawaii property records. President Trump also made a promotional appearance at the property in 2017 ahead of a diplomatic trip, which is disgusting in its own right, but they don't actually say that over at Crew, which is weird because that's their thing. Rettig's financial interest at Trump-branded property, they argue, raises serious ethics questions as the president continues to fight to keep his tax returns secret. The public has a strong interest in seeing the president's tax returns to understand whether he's using the White House to further his own bottom line. He is. I just don't know if this is the way he's doing it. The fact that Trump's IRS commissioner is entangled in the president's business interests means we have to ask whether Rettig's decision on releasing the president's tax returns is based on the public interest or his own financial interests. It's a good question. I don't know if this is necessarily the most fruitful field for exploring it. It may very well be that he's motivated by his own financial interest, but for other reasons, and that Trump is leaning heavily on him because he may be able to signal thumbs up and or thumbs down on his future economic prospects in other areas. But I'm not so sure that the Trump Waikiki property makes the argument very clearly. But it's a fun thing to explore, and you never know. Trump is a very stupid and venal man, and he may somehow be able to turn this back on himself in some stupid way and get himself in trouble. All right, let's see. Where else might we turn? There's an awful lot going on. Oh, yes. Heading into the weekend, there was the issue of Trump's having held another phone call with Vladimir Putin, which, once again, the American officials provide zero in the way of insight or readout on the call, and we have to depend on the Russians to find out what happened in this call, and that's a bad thing. David Graham covered it for The Atlantic under the title of Trump's Surreal Phone Call with Vladimir Putin. Once more, the president has failed to press the Russian president on electoral interference. That's true. This time he didn't even bother to ask Vladimir Putin if he did it, because he already asked him that, and Putin said he didn't, and he believed him. So therefore, the task is over. And the president actually got indignant on Friday when he was asked, did you ask Vladimir Putin if he interfered? And he was upset, and he, as an excuse to not answer the question, he told the reporter who had shouted out the question, "Excuse me, you're being very rude. I need to answer this question over here." And he proceeded to tell the previous questioner nothing at all. He just actually literally went back, and the previous question is, what did you talk about in the call? And he said, oh, we talked about a bunch of things, blah, 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 this, that, trade, fighting ISIS, whatever, the usual litany of stupid nothings. And then the other person, figuring the question had been answered already, because it was, shouts out, did you ask at all about the election interference? Excuse me, you're very rude. I want to answer this question. I'm going to answer this person's question first. Turns back to the other person and says, we talked about many, many, many things, all sorts of things. And that was the conclusion, that he was so upset. The person interrupted my telling this other person that we talked about many things, none of which I will name specifically after this point. Thank you for interrupting, Mr. Talks Too Much over there. So it was a pretty stupid moment all by itself. Let's see. David Graham has the following to say about the call, though. June 13th, 2018, Special Counsel Robert Mueller charged 12 officers of the GRU, the Russian intelligence agency, with committing large-scale cyber operations to interfere with the 2016 U.S. presidential election. Perhaps you've heard that happened. 3 days later, Donald Trump met with Vladimir Putin in Helsinki, Finland. Speaking at a press conference beside Putin, Trump absolved Russia of any hacking. Remember that? He just said it's not Russia. I will say this. I don't see any reason why it would be, Trump said. So I have great confidence in my intelligence people, all of a sudden. You got that now. But I will tell you that President Putin was extremely strong and powerful in his denial today. He's rippling, you might even say. And what he did is an incredible offer. What a non sequitur. So he immediately dives back. I don't know what to say, so I'm immediately going to go to used car salesman mode. What he did is an incredible offer. All right, fine. What is it? He offered to have the people working on the case come and work with their investigators with respect to the 12 people. I think that's an incredible offer. But I don't even think I analyzed that comment at the time. What he did was he said, you should send all the people in the United States who were working on this case who accused my GRU of interfering, send them to Russia, and we'll let them, send them to Russia so that they can investigate and talk to the people here and fall out of windows. 12 different windows, possibly. Here, maybe some in Ukraine. Send us all the people who are looking into whether or not we colluded. Send them to me, Vladimir Putin, friend of foreign inquiry. All right, I'll murder every last one of them. What an incredible offer. And he didn't take him up on that. That's nice. The remarks forced Trump's approval rating, politicians' pretenses, and jaws to drop. Republicans who'd been reluctant to criticize the president were horrified to see him taking the Kremlin's word over that of his own aides and the U.S. intelligence community. I just said that I have great confidence in him. I said no offense, right? That doesn't erase things. But yeah, Jaws should also have dropped that he would say what a great offer it is. Putin, it is a great offer to Trump. Vladimir Putin offered to murder every American who was investigating me. And I think that's an incredible offer. It is. Trump repeated the sin in an hour-long phone call with Putin on Friday. The other sin. 2 weeks after Mueller's report laid out even more detail about the dimensions of Russian interference in the election, Trump didn't bother to condemn Putin or complain about the interference. He didn't even bring it up. But don't expect this reprise. Did we say reprise? I never did get the pronunciation of that word right. To elicit the same reaction as Helsinki. Whereas Trump's refusal to defend U.S. elections against foreign interference was once shocking, it's now become expected. Very dangerous, but true. In brief remarks during a visit with the Slovakian Prime Minister, who's very rude, by the way, reporters asked Trump about the call. Had he discussed Russian meddling with Putin? And I guess the answer, he sort of smiled when he said something to the effect that it started off as a mountain. Was this a phone call? How do you know he smiled? Did they do FaceTime, these two now? He sort of smiled when he said something to the effect that it started off as a mountain and ended up being a mouse, which is at best a mixed metaphor. I just don't know what metaphor the mouse comes from. But he knew that because you knew there was no collusion whatsoever. So that is pretty much what it was. And the reporter then says, "Did you tell him not to meddle in the next election?" That's when he says, "Excuse me, I'm talking. I'm answering this question. You're very rude." So we had a good conversation about many things, okay? That was the big finish that was interrupted that I told you about. Reporter, did you tell him not to meddle in the next election? Undaunted. Trump, now, excuse me, I want to ignore your question and you're making it difficult. We didn't discuss that. Really, we didn't discuss it. We discussed 5 or 6 things. Thanks for the answer. 5 or 6? What were they? Not that. It's not hard to believe that he didn't discuss it, since the president has repeatedly shown great hesitation in discussing the hacking, or the Russian hoax, as he called it on Friday. The problem is not that Trump is willing to speak to Putin. It's important and useful for the United States to maintain diplomatic channels, even with adversaries. I think we all know this. And working with Russia can serve U.S. purposes in Syria, Venezuela, and elsewhere. They're not, but they could. The president, of course, remarking, getting along with Russia and China is a good thing. Not that he does, but it's not a bad thing. And getting along with countries, it's a good thing. Yeah, I know, you just said that. And we want to have good relationships with every country, Trump said, repeating himself over and over. All well and good. The problem is that Trump is unwilling to simultaneously hold Russia to account for its brazen interference in the election. No one in government other than Trump denies the Russian attack. That's a good point. There is only one person that denies the attack, and that's the president. During Attorney General William Barr's testimony to the Senate Judiciary Committee last week, of course, Democrats and Republicans all agreed on the attacks and the serious threat to American elections. A consensus that was all the more impressive since there was practically nothing else on which all 3 parties agreed. One reason Trump can't bring up the hacks is that he is a terrible negotiator, despite all claims, right? Because he is bad at one-on-one discussions and eager for Putin's approval, he is unable to discuss other issues with Putin while also holding a firm line on election interference. Another is that he has fiercely resisted any suggestion that his electoral victory was the fruit of anything other than his own genius. Whenever the subject of Russia's interference, its social media campaigns, its hacking, its dissemination of private emails has surfaced, Trump has responded angrily, as if acknowledging what Russia did would call into question the legitimacy of his victory. And not without reason. Many Democrats believe that it does. The other big reason for Trump's silence is that he remains incapable of separating himself from Putin for the purposes of the investigation. Trump insists that the Mueller report found no collusion, no obstruction. In fact, it made neither of these conclusions, but cannot make the distinction that even as the special counsel's probe did not charge him with any crimes or find a criminal conspiracy by his campaign, it unequivocally did conclude that there was Russian interference. It is as though Trump believes that because he was supposedly vindicated, everyone else was also vindicated. That's an extraordinarily generous way of putting it even. Trump's failure to bring up the interference is also terribly hypocritical. During an interview with Fox News on Thursday, he criticized former President Barack Obama for not doing more to push back on Russia during the election. He could have called out the troops, and he could have said, let's look at this very closely. Two very incongruous statements, one of which is his stand by look at very closely line. But he did absolutely nothing because he thought that crooked Hillary was going to win the election. Trump said then. On Friday, Trump spoke to Putin and by his own account did absolutely nothing. And now for the analysis. It's Helsinki all over again. In this case, at least, Trump didn't offer to allow Russian intelligence agents to take part in the investigation or to submit a former American diplomat to Russian interrogation. And he didn't do it while standing next to Putin on a dais. But in substance, Trump's call essentially, again, reprised his earlier performance. What is that pronunciation? Somebody tell me. He still refuses to acknowledge Russian interference or do anything about it, even though there's now even more evidence to back it up. Yet, as Julian Sanchez, senior fellow at the Cato Institute, is that where he's parked, notes, Trump's denial of reality seems to be working for him politically. So optics, it's great. In July of 2018, right after the GRU indictment and the Helsinki summit, about half of Republicans said Russia had interfered in the election. By February, this was down to a quarter. Why should Trump acknowledge reality and do the hard work of pushing back on Putin when it's easier to just convince his supporters of a fiction? Well, he wouldn't. So good point. Thank you for bringing that up. I don't think I was aware of that effect in the polls, although I guess I should have guessed that they thought that was the effect. I just didn't know whether they had data that indicated it really was. All right. Where to go from here? There's an awful lot. One admonition issued over the weekend, I think, somewhat interesting. Trumpers beware. Remember who you were and what you stood for before it's too late. Virginia Heffernan offering this up as an op-ed. I found it in the Los Angeles Times. I don't know if it ran exclusively there or not. But interesting thought, interesting warning to the ranks of Republicans. I don't think it will be absorbed, but just so you know, it's out there. If this country is ever going to disentangle from the Trumpism that's choking the life out of it, well, the bigger problem is it's wider Republicanism. But okay, we're going to need escape routes. We've heard plenty from self-congratulatory Democrats, cerebral #never Trumpers, and aloof European historians who warn about the perils of authoritarianism in our naive nation. It's very close to native, but okay. Naive is, of course, more important as a descriptor than native nation. What's the big deal if it's native? All right. What we need is advice from people who have been fully enchanted by President Trump's racism, corruption, and assault on the rule of law. Bob, before you say, what, why, here's the answer. She means people like Attorney General William Barr, Trump's latest fixer, though Barr seems prepared to go to his grave in Trump's harness. But really, we don't have to wait for Barr's white light conversion. We have three extraordinary examples of figures who broke free of Trumpism and the man himself. Trumpism is such a totalizing belief system that the country is going to require a thorough, even spiritual metamorphosis. The first heretic is Michael Cohen. You all know about him. Trump's formerly slavish Guy Friday, some description. The second is James Comey. And that's an interesting way of regarding James Comey, but I think it's correct. The self-righteous former director of the FBI who wrote an op-ed this week that probed Barr's and former Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein's appalling submission to Trump, as well as his own, though he didn't go far enough. The third is one we mentioned on Friday, Katie McHugh, right? A former avatar of the alt-right and suck-up to the Trump family. Maybe it wasn't Friday that we did it. It could have been Thursday. According to a riveting profile by Rosie Gray in BuzzFeed News, McHugh has renounced what she now sees in a rigorous religious framework as her sins. 2 months ago, Cohen's testimony to Congress about his fall into Trump's clutches also had a religious note. Swept up in Trump's nonstop bellowing, Cohen felt complicit, intoxicated. It began to lie for him. Now he's especially ashamed of enabling Trump's florid racism, which he sees as an affront to his father who escaped the racist genocide in Nazi Germany. Well, good, it is. Reaffirming his commitment to the values he shares with his family and facing prison, Cohen had to hit bottom to clear his mind. Comey had to just about bottom out too before he caught himself. After he lost Trump's support and was dramatically fired as FBI director 2 years ago, he discovered that he had bent his carefully cultivated Methodist rectitude to the pressure to backslap with the president. According to his op-ed, when Trump raved to him about his fever dreams, largest inauguration crowd in history, Comey stayed silent, too cowed to challenge him. Trump eats your soul, said Comey, and you end up making various deals with yourself and the devil. You can't say this out loud, maybe not even to your family, he wrote. Like Cohen, Comey felt that in standing by Trump, he was betraying not just his conscience, but his family. The far-right blogger McHugh, a one-time protege of former Trump advisor Stephen Bannon, has a more tragic story than either Cohen or Comey, but she's also the one who has done the most to make amends. We'll see. Lost and isolated at a liberal arts college in Pennsylvania. There are many. The conservative McHugh, according to Gray's profile, moved from supply-side economics and family values to hotter niches like, say, Holocaust denial. Ooh, fun. Her undergraduate antics drew the attention of the alt-right godfathers, including Bannon, who gave her a job at Breitbart News. While boosting Trump, her posts helped pioneer a scrappy, reckless new kind of Twitter-optimized racism. Then she went too far, even for Breitbart, in a tweet about Muslims, and had to ply her wares at seedier and seedier joints, pushing the far, far, far right boundaries of white supremacy. Good description there, too. Seedier and seedier joints. It's true. Finally, without health insurance and suffering from diabetes, McHugh found that her strategy of moving farther right to get attention and jobs failed her. It was the 5th century works of St. Augustine that brought her back, so she claims. If she renounced her misdeeds and recommitted herself to a dignified life, she too could be forgiven. McHugh did more than that, though. She turned over Rosie Gray, that is, showing former Department of Homeland Security official Ian Smith's ties to white nationalists, and Gray's resulting article helped get Smith fired. I don't think we even noticed that. This is how escapees from Trumpism can help break its spell for the more casual devotees, expose what the high-ranking Trumpers espouse in order to enlighten the members of the fabled base about their mistakes. At the very least, Trumpites seem to recognize that they will need to atone. Even Trump's mouthpiece lawyer, Rudy Giuliani, may see the writing on the wall. Maybe. He told a reporter, "I am afraid it will be on my gravestone. Rudy Giuliani, he lied for Trump." Well, it certainly should be. I'll put it there if it isn't. To all Trumpites, rank and file or highly public, who likewise may be starting to grapple with what will happen to them when they meet their makers, Cohen, Comey, and McHugh offer guidance. Remember who you were and what you stood for before Donald and before it's too late. For you and the nation. Very dramatic and very interesting. Time for our last break, heading into our final segment. We can jump around a little bit in pocket and try and hit all the highlights and bring you as close to up to speed as possible. And we'll see how much we can cram in after this. Hi, it's me, David Waldman, your host for Kagro in the Morning, with a brand new interruption to say thanks to all of you who support the show. Remember when I told you that our average monthly donation was about $7, for which you were getting 2 great hours of news and entertainment 5 days a week, and how that came out to about 70 cents an hour? That's a pretty good deal, except it's wrong. The math actually works out closer to 17 cents an hour. It is hard to beat a deal like that, and even harder to send your kids to college on. Thankfully, Patreon.com makes it easy to make that work. Patreon, Patreon.com, is the simple, secure way to make recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Just search for me or the show name on the site, and they make it easy to crowdfund the show so that the power of our numbers can keep the show going for just a few bucks a month. Once again, thanks so much for all your support. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. We'll take a stab at what comes next. There's an awful lot, and let's see. There's a couple things that need to get on the record, and a couple, I think we'll fill in the blanks, though, with more analysis of the craziness happening and try and make sure that we have all things on the map with respect to what Trump himself was up to. This was an interesting entry this morning from the New York Times. All right, fine, get a little pop-up out of my way. Thanks very much. An opinion piece by James Reston Jr., whom they note is the author of The Conviction of Richard Nixon, The Untold Story of the Frost-Nixon Interviews. I did not even realize there were any untold stories about that, but I don't think that's what this is about. This, though, is under the title of Trump's Other Impeachable Offense. Now, I wonder if that other impeachable offense turns up in the piece I declined to read aloud on Friday called All of the Impeachable Offenses from The Atlantic. But those of you who read it will be able to tell me offhand, I suppose, whether this made an appearance in there. As Nixon learned, Congress will not abide a president who defies its subpoenas. Yay, subpoenas. And that's important because, of course, of what's happening today in the Judiciary Committee, which is that they've decided that later they're going to decide on what to do about the subpoenas. Very exciting. On July 30th, 1974, 9 days before President Richard Nixon resigned, the House Judiciary Committee added a third article to its impeachment charges against the president. The first two had dealt with obstruction of justice and abuse of power. Article 3 charged that Nixon had failed to comply with 8 congressional subpoenas related to the Watergate investigation. That's really another form of obstruction of justice, but they thought they did it in here. And this is important in this context, today's context, this week's context. Now, with President Trump and William Barr, his attorney general, refusing to cooperate with congressional investigations, the Democrats in the House should take yet another lesson from Watergate, or any of them would be fine. They are reportedly already preparing impeachment articles on obstruction of justice. Really? Is that being reported? They should add failure to comply with Congress to the list. Sure, why not? The subpoenas against Nixon demanded 147 unedited tape recordings of presidential conversations. A list of meetings and telephone conversations for 5 specific suspicious periods between 1971 and 1973, and copies of any handwritten presidential notes pertaining to the Watergate charges. In response, Nixon asserted that the Judiciary Committee already had the, quote, full story of Watergate, unquote, and did not need to have further materials. That's very unlikely sounding. He produced none of the 147 unedited transcripts that had been requested. That bundle of withheld tapes included the critical June 23rd tape. That was, when it was finally released, ultimately what drove the president from office, and that Nixon had listened to many weeks earlier. He did hand over 33 transcripts of edited conversations that had not been requested by the committee, along with edited notes from John Ehrlichman, one of his advisors, that had already been given to the special prosecutor, Leon Jaworski. No handwritten presidential notes were produced. So, okay, why is all this important? You'll find out. In response, the committee approved Article 3. It charged that the president, quote, has failed without lawful cause or excuse to produce papers and things as directed by duly authorized subpoenas issued by the committee, unquote. Instead, it read, Nixon had substituted his own views as to what materials were necessary for the committee, sound familiar, to render its judgment, and had interposed the powers of the presidency against the lawful subpoenas of the House of Representatives. His refusal to comply interfered with the committee's ability to fulfill its constitutional duties and was, therefore, subversive of constitutional government. Yes, an important point, because, of course, President Trump has taken a similar approach to Nixon's, declaring that the Muller Report should mean the end of any related congressional investigations and that he would defy any subpoena that came from them. In response, really from them, that meaning them being Congress. But it might also very well mean defy any subpoena that stems from the reading of the Mueller report. Anyway, he'll defy them all. In response, congressional leaders have said they would take the matter to court. That's a good thing to do, to have the courts reaffirm what is already clearly the law. And Congress will probably win, but a court case could take months to conclude, years in fact, playing into the president's apparent strategy of running out the clock. Yet Mr. Trump's defiance can, in and of itself, form the basis for an additional impeachment article, a fact that Nancy Pelosi, the Speaker of the House, recognized on Thursday. Ignoring subpoenas of Congress, not honoring subpoenas of Congress, that was Article 3 of the Nixon impeachment, she said, and she's absolutely correct. And you see what he's driving at here, and I think he's making the point pretty well. But just in case it's not coming through clearly enough, if you find the question of how to handle the contempt of Congress effectively, if you find that difficult, should we pursue statutory contempt? Should we pursue inherent contempt? Is there any value in one or the other? The statutory contempt is the more conventional approach, but as he points out here, it takes too long. The inherent contempt works better, it's more direct, but it's archaic and we feel like people would view it as stunningly disproportionate to what's going on. It isn't. It's actually a step below what they could be doing and should be doing and did do in 1974, which will somehow, I think, interestingly enough, be viewed as somehow less radical than throwing people in jail directly on congressional authority, which is to impeach. The point he's making here is impeachment for refusal to comply with subpoenas is a remedy for contempt that doesn't involve the courts and statutory interpretations of statutory contempt and doesn't involve the shocking aspects of throwing somebody in a prison cell, in a jail cell, on congressional authority, as with inherent contempt. It simply moves to impeachment with it. And it's actually a more drastic remedy, but it's actually one people perhaps may be more familiar or even comfortable with, even though it appears that the comfort level with impeachment isn't very high. It's certainly higher than it ever was for certainly higher than it was for Nixon before any impeachment inquiries actually began. It's hard to compare apples and oranges or this orange guy because the two chronologies are not exactly the same. So it was hard, for instance, for me to say at this point in the process for Nixon, we had X, whereas at this point in the process for Trump, we have Y. They didn't really approach things in exactly the same order or along the same procedural lines. Anyway, so I think this makes a great point. Why puzzle over which kind of contempt to use when you can simply say, well, one of the things that Congress can do about the refusal to comply with subpoenas, one of the things is contempt, and the other thing is just say, that guy can't be president anymore. And that's not a bad option. I'd go that way, too, and we should all be happy if they did go that way. All right, so let's see. Mr. Trump's defiance can in and of itself be the basis of an impeachment article, and Pelosi says as much. President Trump's assertion that there is nothing left to learn from congressional hearings, which, unlike the Mueller investigation, would be televised, may be correct. But that is beside the point. It is up to Congress, not him, to decide. He also clearly fears the dramatic spectacle that such hearings would surely provide. Once again, the Nixon model applies. Who can forget the scenes of John Dean, Nixon's former White House counsel, testifying about the cancer on the presidency and hush money payments to the Watergate burglars? Nor can students of Watergate forget the power of the televised hearings of the House Judiciary Committee during the summer of 1974. Far from being politically divisive, they proved a dignified and appropriate response to egregious presidential misconduct. Enough to persuade 7 out of the committee's 17 Republicans to vote in favor of at least one of the articles of impeachment. Lawrence Hogan, now known as Larry Hogan, of Maryland, the father of the current governor of Maryland, was the only Republican to vote for all 3 impeachment articles. I'm glad that was cleared up because I think earlier last month, I guess we read somewhere that Hogan was the only Republican to vote for all 3 and that it was the same guy who's the current governor of Maryland. And I thought, that's an awfully long time to be out of electoral politics in between Watergate and now, and then resurface as governor of Maryland. I thought that was pretty improbable. But this is a much better explanation, and probably the real one. I'm glad I read that. It did strike me as odd. If the present moment has yet to offer any similar profiles in courage, Reston continues, that does not mean we will never see dramatic conversions. This early in our current process, it is a mistake to presume that no Republican lawmaker, House or Senate, will ever have a crisis of conscience and vote against Mr. Trump. And it is even an even bigger mistake, and it is even a bigger mistake. He actually writes that. To let that presumption influence whether an impeachment process should be initiated or not. If nothing else, televised hearings would demonstrate that Mr. Trump not only lacks the respect for the rule of the law, but for Congress and the separation of powers, a fact that in and of itself is an impeachable offense. And well put, and I do wish that they had sort of nailed that down in there and say, if you're not sure about whether it's contempt or what kind of contempt it is or whether people will accept contempt, then skip it. The other thing you can do, we were looking at it, maybe it's a good play too, right? You say, you're upset with the idea of inherent contempt because you think it's too crazy a remedy. Well, the other one we've got is impeachment. So I guess we'll do that one. And if then people say, no, contempt is fine. You know what? Oddly, you convinced me that it's not. And I'm going to go straight to impeachment. But good point there, and well argued, and good history lesson as well. Let's see. Other items of interest that we might need to include here. There are 2 reports about the same event here, which are of some interest. The Daily Beast and The Intercept have both reported on this, and the Daily Beast that I have anyway is just a short blurb. The Intercept, as with most things in The Intercept, is probably a lot longer. But let's give you at least the Daily Beast's blurb on the item so that you know what's out there. shocking but not surprising, I suppose. Eric Prince, in the news already for lots of horrible things, set up intel training for Project Veritas, James O'Keefe's stupid group. Isn't that interesting? According to reports here, Blackwater founder Eric Prince arranged for political activist, very generous, James O'Keefe's conservative group Project Veritas to receive more than one round of, quote, training in intelligence and elicitation techniques. The Intercept reports. Okay, so they're working off of the Intercept thing. So I'm sure theirs is longer. In 2016, the self-styled, quote, guerrilla journalist group reportedly got lessons from a retired military intelligence operative. The training lasted several weeks and didn't give them any intelligence at all, and ended with the operative, Euripides Rubio Jr. Amazing. Reportedly quitting because the group, quote, wasn't capable of learning. Isn't that something? Not surprising, but it's fun to have it said out loud. In 2017, Prince next set Project Veritas up with a former British MI6 officer in hopes of turning the organization into, quote, domestic spies, which actually is really, really close to the line on treason when you are pro-Trump. Domestic spies, according to the report. Amazing. At the time, O'Keefe posted social media photos of the event, good spies, at Prince's Wyoming ranch, claiming he was training in, quote, spying and self-defense, and planned to turn Project Veritas into, quote, the next great intelligence agency. It really, really is damn close to the line here. Private, pro-Trump, but essentially anti-government spy agency funded by an informal advisor to Trump, sibling to a cabinet member, and head of an infamous international mercenary organization. It's not really looking good for the constitutional definitions and statutory definitions of treason. I think they need some updating. Pretty weird. Let's see. How long is the Intercept piece? Let me at least credit the writer for having put it out there. Matthew Cole, published in the May 3rd edition of The Intercept, if there is such a thing as an edition of The Intercept. The Complete Mercenary. Good title. How Eric Prince used the rise of Trump to make an improbable comeback. Interesting way of putting it. Won't be able to get through the entirety of the article, but I refer it to you for reading. Maybe we can spend some time on it yesterday, but here I'll just, I think, be thankful for the fact that the Daily Beast picked it up and summarized it so that, I feel bad that we didn't give the Intercept the initial credit on that, but strike all that, reverse it. The Intercept and Matthew Cole did the work. Daily Beast just summarized it, though I'm glad they did, so I could put it on your radar and still have time for other items to bring to your attention. Here's one about which I'll have mixed feelings. Andrew Kaczynski and Nathan McDermott at CNN reporting that a group running robocalls impersonating Trump's campaign has already raised more than $100,000. Like I say, mixed feelings about it. I don't mind bilking Trump supporters out of money that they thought was going to go to Trump, especially if it never does. But it goes to a conservative activist who I think should, starve to death and leave us all alone already. And now he won't, and he'll be swimming in cash and enjoying a fancy lifestyle based on nothing. But again, he did steal it from Trumpers, so I'm not sure how I feel about it. But you know me, I'm Mr. Law and Order. The call sounds like it's coming from President Donald Trump's 2020 re-election campaign, they report. It even uses a recording of the president's voice. It's actually me saying, "I'm Donald Trump. Tonight I am asking you to defend our very dangerous southern border out of love and devotion to our country." What a mangled piece of crap line that is. A deep-voiced narrator then comes on asking, I guess, the listener to be one of the hundreds, thousands of patriots. It says it's not hundreds of thousands, but I guess they mean hundreds, indeed, thousands. Be one of the hundreds, thousands of patriots that helped President Trump finally build a wall. It says actually build the wall. Maybe they even say that. Build the wall by making a one-time, urgently needed donation to the campaign. Which, of course, would not be allowed to, wouldn't be allowed to pay for the wall. But who cares? There's no such thing as law anymore. So that's what they're doing. The claim is, 1, they built the wall. 2, that they're still building the wall. And 3, that the way to build the wall is to donate to the campaign, which will somehow pay for the wall. Calls like this one, said to number more than 200,000, have helped raise more than $100,000 in January alone. Was that 200,000 calls that raised $100,000? What a rate. Fantastic. Anyway, but that money isn't going to the Trump campaign, whose spokesperson told CNN they were not affiliated with the calls. Instead, the calls are coming from a political action committee that isn't affiliated with Trump's reelection effort and hasn't spent any money so far in this or the last election cycle, according to records from the FEC, which they might be lying on. A CNN K-file investigation into the group behind the calls, Support American Leaders PAC, reveals it is run by 32-year-old Matthew Tunstall, Tunstall, who has a history of managing shadowy groups that target people with politically charged calls in order to raise money while doing very little. It's a great model, if anything at all, to put that money towards a political purpose. Just pure scam. Tunstall made more than $300,000 through these groups in the 2016 presidential cycle, FEC records show. The operation effectively amounts to an income cycle of wash, rinse, and repeat, paying for ads to raise money, to pay for more ads to raise money, and so on, with Tunstall taking home whatever money doesn't get used to pay for more ads. The enterprise may also be breaking spending rules policed by 3 different federal agencies on impersonation and ad disclosure. Determining who was behind the calls was difficult. The recorded calls come from non-working numbers, do not identify the group responsible for them, or provide a callback number. And when K-File reached multiple call center operators working for the group, they each provided the name of a PAC that does not exist. The calls use multiple scripts. Some use publicly available audio of Trump, making it appear as if the president made a recording for the PAC. Another call asks for a one-time donation to Trump's campaign to help fund the border wall, while others directly mimic a pitch sent by the Trump campaign asking for money to send fake bricks to House Speaker Nancy Pelosi and Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer. Those practices appear to be in violation of the Federal Trade Commission regulations, also the FEC and FCC, Federal Communications Commission, rules on impersonation and requiring ads to disclose the name of the organization making the calls. In response to written questions from CNN, Tunstall claimed the calls followed required rules and said any calls beginning with "I'm Donald Trump" were the results of technical errors and that such calls were ceased immediately following CNN's inquiry. Oh, you caught us, so now we're stopping. But everything else follows the rules. No, it doesn't. Goodbye. He goes on to say here, a quote from Tunstall, "This was a technical error if you heard this, if you even did. There were many different variants that have been recently tested for different political ads regarding support for President Trump," Tunstall wrote CNN in an email. "I've been instructed by multiple legal sources that using voice clips from politicians is acceptable and not considered impersonating because politicians are public officials and do not have rights to their likeness like normal private citizens and celebrities do." Yes, but using it for fraudulent purposes is still fraud. You can't claim public domain or public figure exemptions for fraudulent use. Tunstall has a history of managing PACs that targeted conservative and liberal ends of the spectrum. Boo! We should arrest him for the second one. During the 2016 presidential election campaign, BuzzFeed reported that Tunstall was behind both Progressive Priorities PAC, a group that claimed to support Hillary Clinton and Bernie Sanders and the Democrats' agenda, and Liberty Action Group, which claimed to support Trump. Nearly all of the money donated to both groups went to paying for radio ads and calls that solicited more donations, or to Tunstall and unspecified media consultants, like probably Tunstall. He bought the ads himself and then charged a fee for that. According to FEC records, the groups did not donate to any actual candidates. CNN's K-File reported in 2017 that Liberty Action Group raised nearly $3 million through radio ads and robocalls during the 2016 election by asking for contributions to help elect Trump, with Tunstall himself being paid more than $300,000. And I guess it's possible to do it legitimately. If you're running ads in support of a candidate as an independent expenditure, I guess that's a thing. But if you're spending all your money on the calls, just pumping them back into your own pockets, that's not going to work so well. Liberty Action Group used former presidential candidate Ben Carson's name without his consent on fundraising appeals in 2016, asking voters to sign a pledge they claimed was signed by Carson to support Trump. In 2016, the group was sued by a San Francisco man who said they illegally placed robocalls to his cell phone, causing him to incur unwanted charges. Court records show the case was settled. It's a good way to make some money. K-File also reported that in early 2017, several people received phone calls from Progressive Priorities PAC that played a recording of former President Barack Obama, followed by a request to donate to help Obama impeach Trump. I think I would see through that one. A spokesperson for the former president told CNN's K-File at the time those calls were reported to law enforcement. What? A spokesperson told CNN's K-File at the time those calls were reported to law enforcement. Got it. Okay. That's what they did at the time. Despite past reporting, Tunstall doesn't seem to have changed his ways. What do you know? No consequences for Republican grifters. But he claims his ads never intended to impersonate anyone and claims this time around he plans to spend the money to support candidates like President Trump. Regarding impersonation, Support American Leaders PAC has never willfully intended to do anything other than comply with the FEC regulations and support candidates like President Trump. Support American Leaders PAC is not the Trump campaign or affiliated with the Trump campaign, he added, but recorded robocalls reviewed by CNN's K-File and calls and data obtained from NomoRobo, a company with a widely used application to stop robocalls. Oh, no more robo. I gotcha. To stop robocalls on cell phones and landlines. Their data shows Support American Leaders PAC did not have any required disclosures on their calls. Calls from Support American Leaders PAC began with clips of Trump and ended asking for callers to either connect with a call operator or unsubscribe. CNN's K-File first discovered the calls on the NomoRobo website, which tracks robocalls through the 250,000 phone lines they own in order to block them on their application. Interesting. In calls sent to phone numbers owned by NomoRobo, 1,688 calls received on 545 different lines. Not a single instance recorded included a disclaimer of who was behind the calls. An FEC spokesperson told K-File that they require the telephone solicitations by a candidate's campaign or committee must include a clear disclaimer identifying the name of the committee that paid for the communication. Communications not sent by a committee authorized by a federal candidate must have a disclaimer as well. Their disclaimer must state the name of the committee paying for it and whether or not it was authorized by a federal candidate. The FEC also prohibits fundraising that misrepresents the person as speaking, writing, or otherwise acting for or on behalf of any candidate. It's not the use of the voice that makes it impersonation. It's that you're impersonating a campaign that is working on behalf of someone else, even if they're, especially when you're not, I guess. Okay, very interesting. There's much more that I can't get to, but again, take a look. Tunstall and his pack aren't easy to find, they report, and explain what they had to go through just to track down who he was and what he was up to. Amazingly, apparently this is something he did 4 years ago, made a killing at it, and is back doing it again because laws, consequences, and you got to get up in the morning and obey the law, or else there's no point, right? There's no reason to go to work anymore. Just start one of these things. I'd love to know what his excuse is this time, or whether he's raising any money under another progressive banner. All right, well, keep an eye open for that, and keep an ear open for the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy with Justice Putnam coming up next. Lots of great stuff, which of course I have talked my way into not being able to describe to you. But as always, I promise, like every time, the stuff is amazing, fascinating, and always includes a little of the esoteric from overseas.
From Daily Kos Radio on netrootsradio.com. You have been listening to the Kagro in the Morning Show
with David Waldman.
Although now that I'm monitoring more closely, I don't think there's an overseas element in it today. Of course, today would be the day that I chose to say something like that. But do be sure that always unique perspective, even when we're covering similar stories, it always pays to get a second look at it with Justice Putnam. I encourage you to do that